It's literally been a day since I've last made a video on this James Harden situation, and originally I thought this report was a stretch, but if there's one thing that I've always said to you guys, just so you could be aware, it's that the number one way you could determine whether or not a rumor is more likely true than not true is if it's consistent. And at this point, this is the third time I'm hearing about this in the past like 10 days, so this is a story that's actually worth looking into. So before we get to the content, we're giving away an Instagram follower, $500. All you have to do is follow me on IG. We're also doing the same thing for a subscriber that turns on our notifications on this channel. Now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. Oh man, you guys know I'm like a world expert at doing this. It's time to make our picks for Bounty Sports. Now here's the real cool part about this, man. It's a $4 entry fee, but when you use my promo code TheFlightMike when you're signing up, then you get a free $5 to enter the contest. And you can win up to $1,008 in total prizes, so you might as well just go ahead and sign up with my promo code because what do you have to lose? So there's multiple sports, man. Here we go. We got the Oilers versus the Canadiens. Let's go with the Canadiens. We got the Devils versus the Carolina Hurricanes. I'm gonna go with the Devils. We got the Vegas Golden Knights versus the Tampa Bay Lightning. I'm gonna go with Vegas. We have Toronto versus Detroit. We're gonna go with Toronto. Buffalo versus Arizona. I'm gonna go with Arizona. Vancouver versus Calgary. I'm gonna go with Vancouver. And this is something I'm a little bit more familiar with, the NFL picks. All right, the Bengals versus the Chiefs. I can't pick against the Chiefs. The 49ers versus the Rams. I really hope the Rams win. We got the Celtics versus the Pelicans. Man, all right, we got to go with the Celtics. The Pacers versus the Mavericks. The Pacers are a fair bet. We got the Sacramento Kings versus the Sixers. I'm going to go with the Sixers here. The Wizards versus the Grizzlies. Bro, the Grizzlies are on a tear. I can't say that they're going to get upset. We got the Heat versus the Raptors. I'm going to go with the Heat. The Nets versus the Warriors. I can see this going either way. I'm going to go with the Brooklyn Nets here. And then finally, it looks like we have some MMA up in here. We got Benson versus Islam. I'm going to go with an upset here. And then we got Ryan Darth Bader versus Valentin Moldavsky. I'm going to go with Valentin Moldavsky. So those are my picks, man. I really don't have anything to lose because I didn't have to spend any money. And when you use my promo code TheFlightMike on bountysports.com, you could enter this $4 contest for free because my promo code gives you $5 in your account automatically. And thank you, Bounty Sports, for the sponsorship. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Literally yesterday in the morning, I bombarded your recommended feed with a really interesting James Harden rumor, where apparently the Philadelphia 76ers don't want to trade Ben Simmons during the trade deadline. They are okay and content with waiting all the way until the offseason so they can make a complicated sign and trade that involves Ben Simmons for James Harden. Now, here's the interesting thing about that. There are parts of this that are consistent in the sense where Daryl Morey is literally obsessed with James Harden, even saying that he is a better player than Michael Jordan.
But I don't think they realized James Harden was as good as he is now, right?
That's correct. To be fair, I don't know if anyone did. We put all our assets in to trade for him, but no one could anticipate he'd be the best player in the world. Like,
why did you put all your assets? Why him?
So both the eye test, because he looks amazing. I think anyone would watch him, but if you looked at data at the time, once he had the ball in his hands, and it's still true to this day, and I get a lot of shit because someone asked me who's a better scorer, him or Michael Jordan, and it's just factual that James Harden is a better scorer than Michael Jordan.
Based on the math.
Based on literally, like, you give James Harden the ball, and before you're giving up the ball, how many points do you generate, which is how you should measure offense.
But in another sense where Daryl Morey just historically has been obsessed with trying to get James Harden on the Philadelphia 76ers. Meanwhile, James Harden has always just really enjoyed being spoiled by Daryl Morey. I mean, like, would you not want to play for a guy that thinks you are the greatest player since Michael Jordan, even better than Michael Jordan, and trying to consistently shuffle star players to surround you with? I'm not gonna lie, man, I would love to see these two win a championship together. I just feel like it'd be such a cool story. But we all know how we got here. Last year, James Harden apparently wore a fat suit when he was with the Houston Rockets so he could get traded away from that team to the Brooklyn Nets, which was apparently his preferred destination, which I can't really blame him because that destination probably was the most likely to become a championship contender. When he got traded to that team, they experienced some success and they seemed to be destined for a NBA Finals run. And if it wasn't for Kevin Durant wearing gigantic shoes, then they may have made it to the NBA Finals. but also they had to deal with injuries to both James Harden and Kyrie Irving, and ultimately they weren't able to make the run that they had hoped. Now this year it's a little bit different in the sense that the Brooklyn Nets kind of have everyone at full strength, and I really want to place emphasis on the word kind of. So in the sense where Kyrie Irving's a part-time player, which James Harden isn't a fan of that, and we're going to get to that in a second, and all this frustration is apparently going to lead to James Harden testing free agency for sure. So this is coming to us from a very reputable source, my man Jake Fisher. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a heads up, and this is no offense to Jake Fisher. He's not necessarily on the Woj and Shams tier of insider, but I have yet to see an article from him that is a lie or that is fake news, and he usually writes really great articles as a very reputable source. The reason he's not up there is I haven't heard of him prior to this year, but I'm sure he'll get there soon. And in this article, my man writes that sources explain why James Harden would welcome new scenery next season. By the way, love the title, because I'm honestly wondering why on earth he would want to leave this situation. A lot of you guys even asked me that in my video yesterday, and honestly, I don't blame you. I can't imagine why James Harden would want to leave. But Jake explains the situation, and it seems to be very reasonable. Starting with, as the NBA calendar approaches the February 10th trade deadline, word has circulated around the league about James Harden's increased interest of testing the open market this summer and how his impending free agency is impacting the 76ers asking price for Ben Simmons. In his 13-year career, Harden has never been a free agent, and by all accounts, the former MVP has clear intentions to reach unrestricted free agency for the first time, even if that would lead him to the Brooklyn Nets. All of this seems very reasonable so far. James Harden just wants to go out and see what he could get in free agency. Maybe he could get himself a better situation next year, but he won't be able to get himself a better contract. No one could offer him as much money as the Brooklyn Nets can, to the tune of $70 million more than any other team. But you're James Harden, man. This guy's career earnings is so ridiculous that he literally gives away hundreds of thousands of dollars to the little baby as birthday presents. I'm not kidding. Now, the article continues to say that Harden remains invested in competing for the title in Brooklyn this season, according to multiple sources with knowledge of the situation. But Harden has recently informed several confidants, including former teammates and coaches, of his interest in exploring other opportunities outside of Brooklyn this summer, league sources told Bleacher Report. Now again, this sounds very reasonable. I don't think Harden wants to be a distraction on the court, but I don't think you could be as much of a distraction as Kyrie Irving has been throughout his entire tenure in Brooklyn. And we're gonna get to Kyrie Irving in just a second, because James Harden is really frustrated with Kyrie Irving. The source says that James isn't going to hold back. He's going to tell you where he stands. Harden has been vocal to Nets figures and close contacts alike about his frustrations regarding Kyrie Irving's part-time playing status. A recent injury to Kevin Durant has exasperated the issue, leaving James Harden to shoulder the majority of the offensive burden during Brooklyn home games. Now, I don't know how much I believe that, because you have to admit that at the very worst case scenario, with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant out, James Harden pretty much gets a lesser version of the Houston Rockets when he was running the Houston Rockets. He was shouldering the load for most of his career until the Rockets were able to get him the proper supporting cast. But here's the thing, man. If you remember in the very beginning of training camp, when Kyrie Irving was originally saying that he wasn't getting vaccinated and that he wasn't going to play, there's been multiple instances where James Harden would literally look frustrated and annoyed in his interviews in the beginning of training camp. And it did seem like James Harden was very fed up with Kyrie Irving's antics. Now, I'm not here to debate whether or not Kyrie Irving was justified in not getting vaccinated or whether vaccine mandates are right or wrong. All I'm saying is fact, that James Harden was annoyed by the situation. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because apparently he has an issue with Steve Nash as well, saying that Nets coach Steve Nash's fluid rotations have also disappointed Harden. Nash has favored hot hand closing lineups rather than a fixed crunch time unit. And it looks like Jake is just finding every reason for James Harden to be upset at this point, because apparently he has issues with the city as well, saying that his new city could also be an issue. According to multiple sources, Harden has not enjoyed living in Brooklyn compared to his days as a central Houston magnate. Outside of the change in climate, the chasm between state taxes in New York versus Texas is quite obvious as well. I really can't imagine James Harden being annoyed about taxes. It's not that I'm saying that he doesn't have a right to be annoyed about taxes, because I'm sure, like, going from no state income tax in general to a very progressive city that's very very big on state income tax, is definitely going to be quite a change for anybody. But like, again, if you look at James Harden's career earnings and the amount he's made in Houston, again, I can't imagine him being upset about that. Now, Jake makes a very important point here, saying that to be clear, there has been no trade request. A Nets-Sixers deal is highly unlikely to materialize prior to the deadline. Yet Harden's apparent openness to joining Joel Embiid and reuniting with Philadelphia 76ers president Daryl Morey will loom over the Sixers trade conversations for Simmons these next 3 weeks. A potential sign and trade for Simmons this offseason was noted by Bleacher Report back in early December. If Harden were to reach free agency, teaming with Embiid in Philadelphia would present one of the few situations that could offer Harden a similar chance to capture the championship he desires. Since his Rockets days, Dwayne Wade's 3 titles have long been somewhat of a self-imposed benchmark for Harden's career. His connection to Morey is clear, and Harden is also known to hold a relationship with Michael Rubin, a Sixers limited partner who bought a minority share of the team in 2011. Now, Philadelphia is not necessarily holding on to Simmons to acquire Harden this summer, sources said, but it seems like both the Sixers front office and Harden himself are viewing that potential marriage as a backstop for their respective futures. Philadelphia officials and executives across the league continue to monitor Bradley Beal's status in Washington. So it seems like Philadelphia is playing the long game here. They really don't care about making a last-second trade in the middle of the trade deadline so they could potentially get themselves another piece to make a push in the East, which is kind of shocking because bear in mind, the Sixers are a few games back, literally like 2 or 3 games back at the time that I'm recording this video, from the Brooklyn Nets for second place. The East is really freaking close. So you would think that they were focused on this season, but you have to also bear in mind, as we said in the Athletic article yesterday, that the Sixers have Joel Embiid for another 4 to 5 years, depending on whether he wants to opt into his option or not, and they want to take their time to make sure that they can use Ben Simmons to get themselves as much value as they possibly can in return so they could build a contender around Joel Embiid. If you remember in the past, there were instances where Elton Brand was a little too trigger happy, pulling the trigger on Tobias Harris and Jimmy Butler, and while that did result in a very exciting and a very loaded Sixers team, they didn't really have much success to show for it, and then ultimately they weren't able to retain Jimmy Butler. Now Jake closes this off by saying, of course, for any sign and trade to happen, Brooklyn would need to be a willing participant. If Harden ever does formally communicate his interest in playing somewhere else this summer, the Nets would likely be hard-pressed to find a greater return for Harden than Simmons, assuming Simmons can rediscover his all-star form. Simmons, after all, was the Rockets' runner-up offer for Harden a year ago, and the Sixers have signaled a willingness to attach additional assets to acquire a player such as Harden or Lillard. For Simmons to be dealt now, as his camp clearly hopes will materialize, Philadelphia has remained primarily engaged with Atlanta and Sacramento as of late. The Kings have shown a willingness to take back Tobias Harris's contract in addition to Simmons. The Hawks, however, are uninterested in acquiring Tobias Harris in order to land Ben Simmons at this time, and have been searching for a third team to function as a trade partner. And of course, this closes off with just general trade rumors saying that both Atlanta and Sacramento are also gunning for Jeremy Grant. The Hawks and Kings join a long list of teams that are trying to trade for Jeremy Grant that include the Lakers, Trailblazers, Knicks, Jazz, Timberwolves, etc. The Bulls have tried to get Jeremy Grant as well, and that's pretty much where any talk about Harden just dissipates. So what do I think about this report? I mean, just going based off of what we've already seen in the past, James Harden is very unpredictable and tries to keep his cards close to his chest until he doesn't really have any choice but to force something to happen. With the Houston Rockets, it was very coy at first. He went up to them and said, "Hey, I would like for you guys to trade me." When they refused to trade him, eventually he started acting out a little bit. He would throw basketballs at the rookies, he would show up in fat suits, he would ditch practice to go to clubs, until eventually the Houston Rockets got the idea and traded him to Brooklyn. Now, I guess this is just him saying, yo, I'm planning on leaving probably this offseason unless something new happens. Maybe this is to put pressure on Brooklyn to improve other aspects of their team, but honestly, I don't know what else you would want an NBA team to do do for you. I mean, Harden has 2 superstar teammates, although one is part-time, and of course one is dealing with an injury right now. But they have a tremendous supporting cast too. LaMarcus Aldridge is there, Patty Mills is there. They have some youngsters that are also contributing, like Cameron Thomas. You have Joe Harris. I mean, I don't know what else you would want from a team. If you compare them to like a team like the Los Angeles Lakers that also have 3-star players that are still struggling to figure things out, bear in mind this is recorded before the Lakers take on the Brooklyn Nets, so I don't really know how that's going to go down, then James Harden should be very thankful for his situation because they have some good role players there as well. The Nets are constructed beautifully in my opinion. Let me know in the comment section down below, what do you guys think about all of this? Are you buying Jake Fisher's report, or do you think it's baloney? A part of me feels like I've read way too much James Harden news recently for me to completely dismiss it, but I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike. I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.